Hello and welcome to another free tutorial video from Cebas Visual Technology. In this video I dive into the exciting world of finalToon and I will explore its incredible new SVG file output feature. But this tutorial goes beyond just exporting SVG files. I'll explain the art of using finalToon's line style to achieve the perfect outline look. Specifically, we'll take a deep dive into a highly underrated and often ignored line type called UDV lines, which stands for User-Defined Visible Lines. I believe this line type is one of the most unique and powerful options in finalToon. And that's not all. I'll address an issue that every 3ds Max user knows too well: the quality of imported CAD data. CAD files can be a real pain to work with, but fear not, I'll share some valuable tips and tricks to tackle this challenge head on. Alright, let's jump right into our scene and see what we have in store for us. I'm your host Edwin Braun and I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks about finalToon. Let's first have a look at the scene and what we have in here. So we have this CAD model. I got that from the internet. That's a 3D printer. It's a pretty complex CAD model. So it has all the screws and everything in there. So the first thing I did is, when you look close, this thing has no screws at all. It still has the threads and everything, but no screws. Why did I do that? For the sake of the tutorial, we don't need to draw things that are not visible at all, because all these screws are sunken in here, so we don't actually see them. So there's no need to go through endless lists of lines and line styles. Still, the model is a real mess or a real pain. So what you see now is just the wireframe model, and we can see the wireframe is really dense. So it means usually with these wireframes, eventually those lines or wires end up as lines in our finalToon rendering. And especially if we want to output for SVG, a scalable SVG file, that might cause problems. However, I'll keep it as is because it's not the idea how to optimize and model correct in 3D Studio Max. We just took this file as is. I just hid some objects and we are going to work with this file as is. So the first thing you would do is just probably just have a test rendering. And let me just do one test rendering so that we see what's going on here. And the test rendering is pretty fast. We are using Final Render. So we have physical material everywhere. So it got the definition, the material definitions from the CAD file. So because we are after the outlines, I don't care actually about the material properties. However, we have thankfully different colors and material properties already there, so we can use them, and I will show you how. So nothing special. Imported the file, cleaned it up. It was a messy file, so I used Mesh Cleaner and it found a huge amount of issues in that file. Double faces, open faces, too small faces, and it's a mess, as you know it when you import CAD model that was meant to go into production, but not for visualization or visual renderings. So the first thing you would do if you want to create a finalToon effect is you would go to the effects rollout. And I know many of you might never ever have opened the effects rollout. Probably you have opened the environment rollout very often for background image or background color and all this stuff and atmospheric effects, but very seldom users use the effects rollout. But in there, let me just bring up the selector of our effects. When you have installed finalToon, you just choose finalToon, and here we go, we have our finalToon effect. So the first thing I want to do and adjust here is I want to use for our shapes, if we wanted to output shapes, the max background color. which is white. So we just assume it's a white paper, but we can use any color we want or a user-defined color. The next thing I want to make sure and check is that we have right now, we are working with default edges. So all the lines or outlines we are going to render are default lines. So I don't have to assign anything to on a material or object basis. However, I will show you how we can use a per object assignment as well. But more of that later. So the first thing I want to make sure, I don't want to have the visible intersections when things stick into each other. That's just too many lines, and probably most often it's not what you want. So I'll turn this line type off. The next thing I want to do, however, I'll open the line editor. I want to use the material color as my line color. So in this case, we would get the gray, and for all the other stuff, we would get the red and whatever colors are assigned in that model. So I just use the body color or our main diffuse color of the material. And that's actually it. Another important setting we want always to turn on, especially if we are planning file outputs, like we are discussing here with SVG, connected lines. I want, when a line is connected or is a long line, I just want a start and end point and not the individual steps in between. So make sure you turn on connect lines for this line style. Then I'll go to crease edges. So I change to the crease edges, default 3, we can see that. Same deal, I want the body color. And I want to make sure that if finalToon creates the lines, the line list, all the little individual steps, if they form a straight line, need to be connected. That's very important for export because you can kill any 2D vector program if you create just 10 billion little line segments. Okay, so that's it. As I said, we're working with the default line, so no complicated material picking and whatever we want to do. We've assigned finalToon in the render effect, and now if we render, we will get our first render pass as usual. So it will render our little 3D printer. And then in the second pass, that's now the render effect, it will start collecting all the edges. Now it will do intersection, sorting of lines, and there are a lot of lines because this model is a real mess. So what we have here now is our output, and we have the rendering with the outlines. And as you can see, the material doesn't bother us right now. We could have a mixed way where we use the shader on top. So let me just to show you how this looks like, because you can create really amazing art styles when you combine and keep the shader. So let me just do that, especially when you have global illumination and things going on. Let me just render that again. So what happens now is we have the original shader, and on top of it we will have our outlines. We'll see how it looks like, because we still have the same material color as our line colors, but we can see if that works. So right now we can see it did something, but because we are using the same colors, it doesn't make much sense. So I would suggest we just go back here, and we'll go back and say, okay, I want a fixed color for that and a fixed color for this. So we no longer use now the color of the material itself for our line. So I fix the line color now to a black line, and then we will see how it looks like. And in combination, if you modify a little bit the color or play a little bit with the transparency of the line style, you can create really amazing artwork with it. So now we have the combination, and now it starts looking really cool. So what we have is our finalToon outline on top of the shader color. Okay, now let me just turn this back to our original. We want to have the diffuse color of the object in both line styles. So we want to have the diffuse color as our line color, and I want to make sure I use the max background to fill in everything. So now we have again our white background and the colors of the materials. So let's just render again and see how it looks like. So the first pass is the normal rendering pass, but now the second pass will just cancel out our rendering. The rendering itself is very fast with Final Render, so it doesn't bother me that we ray trace and do things, but usually we don't need the rendering, so we could turn off global illumination and all kinds of effects and just get a black picture, and then finalToon will do its beautiful line styles on top of it. So the next thing I might want to adjust or change is get a little bit more, because I don't think I like the gray lines because it's from the gray material of the frame. So I would like to just have the frame different. So how would we do that? So if we just wanted to adjust one single line style and have all the other line styles still default, so we would just pick the frames and get the material from the frames. So I'll bring up the material editor. We'll pick one frame and get the material. It's a sub-object material because they have this bare metal up here, which is a brighter metal, and the main painted metal here. So I don't want that for our lines to happen. So we'll just go ahead and choose, in general, we'll have a finalToon wrapper material. finalToon wrapper material is, as the name says, it wraps a finalToon material around this material. So what we can do now is we can tell it, okay, use my local settings, and we can just go ahead and use the local settings with a black color for both line styles, black color. And now this material will be at render time not using what we had here in the render effects. It will not use the default lines or default edges. It will use the local setting. So now when we render, we would get hopefully the result we are after, where we have high contrast dark lines around. So right now this is just a rendering. The renderer can't handle the wrapper material, but that doesn't matter for us because we are not after rendering right now. We're just after having the lines probably under control per object. And that's what's happening right now. So now we have the beautiful, really beautiful high contrast black lines in contrast to those lines. So we see here we have really nice high contrast. So that's what I'm after, really nice, strong frames. And then we can go on and keep on working on the model a little bit. So right now it already looks pretty good. And we can just think about let me just bring back, sorry, I closed the dialog. Let me just bring back our final render frame. So what I don't like is this white area here. So I don't like this. So what I would like to see is some lines maybe that indicate that there is actually a plate where the printer works on. So how would we do that? There's several options, and I already in my introduction I talked about it. There is a special line style that allows us to do that. And let me just bring in the material as well from this object. And we do the same deal. We get the finalToon wrapper material. We keep the old submaterial. And then we say, okay, I want to use local material, local line styles. And then I just say, okay, I want the diffuse color of the object itself. I want the diffuse color of the object itself. And probably we don't need the visible creases here. So let me just render this again so that we know what we're doing. So right now we shouldn't see any big difference at all because I just replaced the material. So in our rendering, we can see the wrapper material is not supported right now by Final Render, but it doesn't matter. finalToon knows exactly what to do, and it still gets the diffuse color from the object. So now we should see in this object's color our outline, and that's exactly what's happening. So that's exactly what we are after. But I want to have these lines, as I mentioned. So if we turn on our wireframe, we can see we have these lines criss and cross. So what we can do is just have a look and render. And so if we wanted to have these lines visible, you would use user-defined visible edges. So we turn these on, these user-defined visible edges, and I'll use the same body color here, but I want to make them a little bit thinner. They should just a hint thinner. And then when we render again, we should see these lines because they are visible. When I turn on wireframe, I can see them. Now we can clearly see these lines here. And you can say, okay, that looks good. That's nice. At least we know that's a plate and all this. But I don't like how this looks like. So this is really ugly. So what can we do about it? How about we work a little bit on that object? So let me just open the groups and just work on that. I'll isolate the selection here and let's just work on this object. And I would suggest that we go ahead and work on the edges, on the visibility of the edges. So you need to have an editable mesh to actually control the visibility of the edges when we select edges, for example. So let me just select all these edges. I don't want to see these edges here. So go away, go away, go away, edge. I don't want to see these edges. So, and now all we need to do is make these edges invisible. Now the edges are gone. We can see edges no longer here. So, but I want to have some really nice pattern or anything that represents that this is a plate. So I'm now adding an edit poly, and the edit poly has a really nice feature. Let me just select the top polygon. Now we've selected the polygon, and let me just go down here. We have our slice plane. Let me just zoom in everywhere. And here's our slice plane. And let me just rotate the slice plane 90 degrees. Here we go. And I'll just move the slice plane down here. So what we want to achieve now is we want our own lines. So now I'm going to draw the finalToon lines, which is really cool and a powerful feature because now these lines are dependent on the geometry. So let me just pick the center somehow. It doesn't have to be accurate right now. I'll just slice that. We have a line sitting here. Let me just go in the center here, slice that. Let me just go in the center here, slice that. And let me go here, slice that. And let me go here, slice that, and we'll go here, slice that. Oops, wrong button, slice that. We'll go here, slice that. The next thing I might want to do is, I don't like these regular stripes. We'll just take the 45 degrees angle and let me just divide that one. And I'll do the same thing here so that it wrong button, that it aligns with the geometry somehow. So that might look really cool. Let me move that here, slice that, and I'll go here, slice that. So now we have these. I'll divide this, and just go here, slice that, and slice that. So what I'm doing is just adding new edges into the model. And these edges are kind of hardware. So I'm really adding edges to the model. Let me just go back here. So, and we can already see, let me just turn off the selection. This is our object as it looks like. Let me just end my isolation. And now we just created these patterns as real geometry or modeled slices. So right now we have outlines that we created by, let me just close the group again so that we have these brackets gone. Okay. Come on, group, close. Okay, group is closed. So now we have everything in here. And oh, I think no, it's okay. So, and we can now render the image and see how our outlines are looking. And that's the real power we have in finalToon. You have full control over the line style. We can control per object. We can control every little aspect of our lines. I think that looks good. The next thing we want to do, and I want to show you, is the functionality of file output. So I'll just go into finalToon and we're selecting the file output. I'll turn off shapes because we don't need that. That would be way overkill. And we'll just pick a file output where we want to save our file. Save as an SVG file. We have it here. And now there we go. Here we have in our web browser, we have the SVG file. And the thing is that when we have this as an SVG file, it's scalable. It's a vector file, so we can scale it up and down and use it anywhere where we want to have scalable vector graphics. And because that's internet standard, you can just read up and find all the industry standard about SVG files. And we can just go in here. Let me just do that little thing here. We can just go in here and define here. Let me just double click here. Transform equals and scale, let's say 1.5. Now when I press enter, you will see we're zooming or scaling our object, and we can do that really cool. Let me scale 3 times and you can scale in here. And because it's a vector, it all works and fits without loss of any quality. It's highly detailed, and the same way down is also possible. We just say transform scale 0.0. And the transform command allows you to scale in different axes. So when I have 2 numbers, it scales in the y-axis in a different factor. So when I omit this value, we just scale the whole object whole vector object. So that's a really powerful feature in finalToon. With one button, you get true 2D vector output that can be scaled and printed and made big and small, any size you want. And that's the real power of finalToon and SVG export. I hope you enjoyed this little video and learned something. And please check out our other videos as well. Thank you so much.